The code being run for lab 2 is here. Same as in my report. Now the board, all buttons are not pressed, all switches are off. LED is just going to keep counting from 0 to 15 and reset after 15 to 0. One button does nothing for button 0 and 1, but together they're going to pause the LED task. And although within the button task, it does not resume the LED task again until both buttons are released, like this. Because the switch task is also on, if I hold these two, it's suspended, and if I release even one, that will trigger a LED resume because that switch 3 is not pressed. Button 2 is LED resume regardless of what these two are. So if I have a suspend here, press 2, it's going to keep counting again. And then button 3 controls the switch task. So if this is pressed, switches do nothing. So these two pushed down at the same time is to suspend, and this resumes. So if we actually hold button 3 and then suspend and release, they will stay suspended because the switch task cannot ever write to resume LED while the task is suspended by button 3. And if the second I release button 3, it will resume. Now I'll do that again. Pause it, still paused. Now if the second I hit button 2, it will resume because button 2 overwrites it. And just as earlier, I'm gonna hold all 3 of them down, and it's gonna keep counting because button 2 always overrides button 0 and 1. So now for the switches. Switches 0 and 1 work the same way as buttons 0 and 1, except when they go both on, it resumes, or it suspends the button task, and it is not resumed, button task is not resumed again until both of them are off together. So we're going to switch them on, and I cannot suspend it with the buttons over here. I'm going to turn one of them off, and I can still not suspend them with buttons over here. Now I'm going to turn the other one off as well. Now I can suspend the LEDs with buttons 0 and 1 together. Again, resume it with 2. And switch 3 over here is for LED suspend. So again, if I'm going to suspend the switches, it's going to keep counting, right? That should suspend LED, but because switches are suspended currently with button 3, that does nothing. Turn that off. Same thing. Turn the button task off, right? Suspend button task, but switch task is already suspended when I do that. So I'll come over here, and it's not going to count, right? So now that I believe is all the different circumstances you can have. And the biggest thing with these two being on the same priority level is this right here, button 0 and 1. We'll suspend it while they're both held, but with the buttons isolated, the LED should not resume until button 2 is pressed. But as you see here, when I release it, LED will resume, and I will not press button 2, and that is because this switch 3, being off, will write the resume even though it is not coming from button. Because both of these can suspend the LED or resume it, they can overwrite each other. So even if this has never sent resume, the switch can. And if the switch has never sent resume or suspend, the button still can. So they can work independently, or they can override each other depending on if either of them, if they're both enabled or if one of them is suspended.